The dim glow of a neon sign flickered over the cracked asphalt of a forgotten diner on the edge of Route 66, where the desert wind whispered secrets through the sagebrush. It was just past midnight, and the air hung heavy with the scent of stale coffee and rain-soaked earth. Inside, at a corner booth scarred by years of lonely travelers, sat Olivia Harper, her fingers tracing the spine of a worn paperback. She was 28, with auburn hair tied back in a loose ponytail, her green eyes shadowed by exhaustion. The book was her shield, a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, the one that had gotten her through foster homes and fractured dreams. But tonight it wasn't enough. Across from her, a group of rough-edged locals, truckers with grease-stained hands and leers that cut like broken glass, had turned their attention her way. She'd come in for a late coffee after a double shift at the local library, hoping for quiet. But the world had other plans. One of them, a burly man with a tattoo snaking up his neck, leaned too close, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. "What's a pretty thing like you doing with that book? Prefer pages over people, huh? Bet you'd rather have some real company." His buddies chuckled, the sound like gravel under tires, as he snatched the novel from her hands, flipping through it mockingly. Olivia's heart pounded, her voice steady but edged with steel. "Give it back. I said I prefer books over men like you." The diner's door creaked open then, letting in a gust that rattled the salt shakers. No one noticed at first. The rumble was subtle, building like distant thunder. But Olivia did, her gaze flicking to the window where headlights pierced the night. A single motorcycle pulled up, its engine growling low, chrome glinting under the neon. The rider cut the ignition, the silence sudden and heavy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a leather jacket weathered by sun and storm, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. Ethan Cole dismounted, his boots thudding against the pavement, a faint scar tracing his jawline like a map of old battles. He'd been riding aimlessly for hours, the road his only confessor since the war that had taken his brother and left him with ghosts. Ethan wasn't one for crowds, but something in the diner's window, a flash of defiance in a woman's eyes, had pulled him in. He pushed through the door, the bell jingling like a warning. The truckers barely glanced his way until he strode to their table, his presence filling the space like smoke. "You heard the lady," he said, voice low and gravel rough, like tires on loose dirt. The burly one sneered, tossing the book onto the table. "Mind your own, biker boy." But Ethan's hand shot out, steady as iron, retrieving the novel without a word. He handed it back to Olivia, his blue eyes meeting hers for a beat, steady, unyielding. The tension crackled, the truckers shifting in their seats, but Ethan's stare held them frozen. He'd seen worse in the sands overseas. Promises broken under fire that still haunted his nights. This was nothing. One by one they backed down, muttering excuses as they tossed bills on the counter and shuffled out into the dark. The diner fell quiet again, save for the sizzle of the grill and Olivia's shallow breaths. She clutched the book to her chest, whispering, "Thank you, I didn't expect that." Ethan nodded, sliding into the booth opposite her without invitation. Up close, she saw the lines etched around his eyes, the kind born of loss, not age. "Books over men, huh?" he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Can't say I blame you, but some of us. We carry stories, too." Olivia arched an eyebrow, surprise cutting through her wariness. "You? A biker with a soft spot for literature?" He chuckled, the sound warm against the chill of the night. "Guilty. Got a whole wall of 'em back at my place. Hemingway, Steinbeck, the classics that remind you why you fight." As the waitress poured fresh coffee, steam curling like desert mist, Olivia found herself talking, really talking, for the first time in months. She spoke of the library job that barely paid the rent, the small-town whispers about her past, the way books had been her anchor after her parents' car wreck left her adrift at 16. Ethan listened, his calloused hands wrapped around a mug, sharing fragments of his own. The brother he'd promised to protect in a foxhole halfway around the world, the discharge papers that couldn't erase the guilt, the Iron Promise crew he'd ridden with until the scars got too deep. "Made a vow once," he said softly, staring into the black liquid, "to watch out for the lost ones. Forgot it for a while, chasing highways. But tonight felt like it called me back." Outside, the first drops of rain pattered against the window, blurring the neon into a hazy glow. Olivia glanced at him, seeing not just the leather and the bike, but the quiet honor beneath. "You didn't have to stop," she murmured. "But you did. Why?" Ethan's gaze lifted, steady as the road ahead. "Because some promises don't fade. And yours, preferring books over the wrong kind of men, that's a story worth defending." She smiled then, tentative, the weight in her chest lightening just a fraction. Little did she know that chance encounter in a roadside diner would unravel threads of fate, pulling them into a web of old oaths and hidden truths that neither could escape. The rain picked up, drumming a rhythm on the roof as Ethan finished his coffee. "Ride safe out there," he said, standing, but Olivia's hand caught his sleeve. "Wait, if you really have that library, maybe show me sometime?" He paused, the door swinging open to the storm. "Dawn's not far, follow if you want." As he stepped into the night, engine roaring to life, Olivia hesitated only a moment before grabbing her jacket. The road stretched endless before them, promising not just miles, but redemption wrapped in leather and ink-stained pages. In the hours that followed, as the storm broke and the sky lightened to a bruised purple, Ethan led her to his modest cabin off the highway, a place he'd built with his own hands after the crew scattered. The door creaked open to reveal not the chaos of a lone wolf's den, but shelves upon shelves of books, floor to ceiling, dust motes dancing in the morning light, classics mingled with war memoirs, poetry volumes tucked beside thrillers. Olivia's eyes widened, fingers trailing the spines. "This? You weren't kidding." Ethan shrugged, hanging his jacket. "Keeps the ghosts at bay. What's your poison tonight?" They talked until the sun crested the horizon, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with aged paper. But as the day wore on, shadows crept in. A phone call from Olivia's past, a voice demanding she return what wasn't hers, tied to a forgotten promise from her foster days. Ethan's crew, scattered but loyal, began to stir at his subtle call. What started as a defense in a diner was blooming into something larger, a ride for justice where books and bikes would forge an unbreakable bond. Yet beneath it all, Ethan felt the pull of his old vow resurfacing, stronger now, intertwined with this woman who'd chosen stories over surrender. The desert wind howled outside, carrying whispers of trials to come, but for the first time in years he wasn't riding alone. The morning sun filtered through the cabin's lace curtains, casting golden shafts across the wooden floorboards that creaked like old bones underfoot. Olivia stood in the center of Ethan's living room, her fingers still lingering on a leather-bound copy of The Old Man and the Sea, the pages yellowed from countless readings. The air smelled of pine resin from the walls he'd hewn himself and the faint, comforting must of forgotten stories. Outside, the desert stretched vast and unforgiving, sagebrush swaying in a breeze that carried the distant hum of semis on the highway. It was a sanctuary. This place, far from the diner's leering eyes and the small-town judgments that had chased her for years. Ethan moved about the kitchenette, his broad frame filling the space as he poured 2 mugs of coffee from a percolator that gurgled like a contented engine. His leather jacket hung on a hook by the door, revealing a faded flannel shirt that spoke of quiet mornings rather than roaring nights. "Black or with a splash?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that blended with the tick of a wall clock shaped like a compass. Olivia glanced up, her green eyes reflecting the warmth of the light. "Black," strong enough to wake the dead. He handed her the mug, their fingers brushing, a fleeting contact that sent a spark through the air, like static from a revving bike. They settled on the worn leather couch, the kind that sagged in the middle from years of solitary wait. Olivia sipped, the bitterness grounding her as she scanned the shelves again. Volumes of Faulkner rubbed spines with dog-eared thrillers by Chandler, and tucked in one corner a cluster of poetry, Rilke, Frost, that surprised her with their tenderness. "How does a man like you end up with all this?" she asked, tilting her head toward the walls, riding the blacktop, dodging storms, and curating a library like some reclusive professor. Ethan leaned back, his scarred jaw tightening for a moment, as he stared at the steam rising from his cup. The scar caught the light, a silvery reminder of shrapnel and screams in a far-off dust bowl. "Started in the service," he said finally, words measured like gravel shifting under tires. "My brother Lucas, he was the reader, dragged me through The Great Gatsby between patrols, said it kept us human when the world tried to strip it away. Promised him I'd keep the stories alive after. He didn't make it back." The confession hung there, heavy as the rain-scented air from the night before. Olivia's throat tightened. She knew loss like an old scar, the kind that itched in the quiet hours. Her parents' wreck had been a blur of twisted metal and siren wails, leaving her to bounce through foster homes where books were the only constants, smuggled paperbacks under pillows, libraries as refugees from hands that gripped too tight. "I'm sorry," she murmured, setting her mug down. "That promise. It sounds like the weight of the world." Ethan nodded, his blue eyes distant, as if seeing foxholes instead of bookshelves. "Carried it like a chain for years. Rode with the iron promise after. Bunch of vets piecing together what the war broke. We swore to each other, watch the backs of the lost, honor the oaths that matter. But life pulls you under. Scattered after a bad run-in with some corrupt badges up north. Haven't called them in. Well, too long." He trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck, the silver in his hair catching the sun like chrome. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the coffee table, a cheap burner she'd picked up after ditching her old life in a dusty Arizona town. The screen lit up with an unknown number, but the area code twisted her gut. The same one from her foster years, a place of locked doors and whispered threats. She hesitated, thumb hovering, but the insistent vibration won out. "Harper," she answered, voice clipped. The line crackled. Then a man's voice slithered through, oily, familiar, like the principal who'd overlooked too much back then. "Olivia, thought you'd slither away for good, but we both know debts don't vanish. That little inheritance you took, the one from the old man's estate, it's mine by right. Return it, or I'll make sure your quiet life turns to ash." Her blood ran cold, the mug forgotten in her hand. The inheritance wasn't gold or jewels. It was a locket, a simple silver thing with a faded photo of her mother, tucked away in a foster home's attic after a fire that left vestiges of struggle in its wake. She'd found it by chance, a thread to the family she'd lost, but the foster father had claimed it as his, weaving lies about ownership to keep her in line. Running with it had been her first act of quiet rebellion, a promise to herself to hold on to something real. Now, years later, it seemed the past had engines of its own, revving to catch up. Ethan watched her face pale, the way her knuckles whitened around the phone. He didn't pry, but his posture shifted, coiled, ready, like a bike idling before a long haul. She ended the call with a sharp, "Leave me be," but the damage was done. "Trouble?" he asked softly, not pushing, just there. Olivia exhaled, sinking deeper into the couch. "Old ghosts. From back when I was a kid in the system. A man who thinks he owns pieces of me, or at least something I took to remember who I was." She pulled the locket from her jacket pocket, its chain glinting faintly. Inside, the photo stared back, her mother's smile, frozen in time. Ethan's gaze softened, reaching out to trace the edge without touching. Promises like that, they don't break easy, but neither do the ones we make to fight them. He stood, crossing to a drawer where he pulled out a worn notebook, his crew's old ledger, names and numbers scrawled in faded ink. The iron promise isn't dead, just sleeping. If this guy's coming for you, maybe it's time I made good on mine. Olivia looked up, the weight in her chest shifting, not gone, but shared. The cabin felt smaller now, charged with possibility as the sun climbed higher, baking the desert outside. By midday, Ethan had fired up his phone, the first call going out to an old number. "Noah, it's Ethan. Got a ride that needs starting. Loyalty calls." The voice on the other end crackled with surprise, then resolve, a brother's echo from the road. Olivia listened from the porch, the wind tugging at her hair as Ethan paced, his words weaving a net of distant engines. One by one replies came. Daniel from the coast, promising to rally. Samuel up in the hills, vowing to ride south. The crew stirred, drawn by the unspoken oath, their chosen family knitting back together over lines of static and steel. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Olivia joined him, the locket heavy in her palm. "You don't know me," she said, voice steady amid the rising wind. "Why risk this?" Ethan met her eyes, the desert horizon framing him like a promise etched in sand. "Because I see the story in you, the one worth telling, and some oaths. They find you when you least expect." The first distant rumble echoed then, a scout from the crew cresting the rise, chrome flashing like a beacon. The ride was beginning, threads of redemption pulling tight as old promises collided with new ones under the relentless sun. The sun hung high over the parched earth, turning the desert into a shimmering sea of heat waves that distorted the horizon like a fever dream. Ethan's cabin, with its weathered logs and sagging porch, stood as a lone sentinel against the vastness, the air thick with the scent of sun-baked sage, and the faint tang of engine oil from his bike parked out front. Olivia paced the wooden planks, the locket clutched in her fist, its edges biting into her palm like a vow she couldn't shake. The calls had been coming in steadily now, gruff voices over the line, each one a thread pulling the iron promise back from the fringes. Noah's drawl from the Pacific, laced with salt air and skepticism turned to steel. Daniel's clipped tone from the inland valleys, promising wheels by dusk. Samuel's quiet rumble from the northern ridges, where pines whispered secrets to the wind. They were coming, not for glory or grudge, but for the oath that bound them. To stand for the broken, to honor what the world tried to bury. Ethan stepped out from the shadowed interior, his flannel sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with old scars, the kind that mapped battles fought in silence. He wiped his hands on a rag, the notebook tucked under his arm like a battle plan. 5 confirmed so far, he said, his blue eyes scanning the empty road that snaked toward the cabin. The rest'll trickle in once word spreads. We ride at twilight. Keep it low. No flags flying. Olivia stopped pacing, leaning against the railing where the wood was warm and splintered under her touch. The wind tugged at her auburn ponytail, carrying the distant cry of a hawk, wheeling overhead. "This isn't your fight, Ethan." That voice on the phone. "He's from a place called Willow Creek, a foster outpost up in the hills. The man, Mr. Harlan they called him, ran it like his kingdom, overlooked things that shouldn't be overlooked, twisted rules to keep control. The locket, it was my mother's, hidden away after the fire that took the old house. He claimed it as salvage, but I took it when I left. It's all I have left of before." Her voice cracked on the last word, the sun casting harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the faint lines of worry that hadn't been there the night before. Ethan nodded slowly, stepping closer, the rag forgotten in his hand. The space between them hummed with unspoken weight, like the pause before a storm breaks. He'd heard stories like hers in foxholes and back-alley meets, kids adrift in systems that chewed them up, promises made to protect that got lost in the shuffle. His own vow to Lucas echoed in his chest. Watch for the ones who can't watch themselves, brother. That's the real war. The war had ended, but the echoes hadn't. Harlan sounds like the kind who corrupts from the inside, Ethan replied, his tone even, like gravel settling. Seen his type in uniform and out. Badges or not, they hide behind authority. But oaths like ours, they cut through that rust. Inside, the cabin's cool dimness offered respite from the blaze outside. Olivia sank into an armchair by the window, the locket open on her knee, the faded photo gazing up like a ghost, demanding justice. Ethan moved to the kitchen, the clink of glass and the hiss of a cooler pulling her from her thoughts. He returned with 2 bottles of water, condensation beading like sweat on the sides, and sat across from her on the edge of the coffee table. The room felt intimate now, bookshelves looming like silent witnesses, their spines a mosaic of lives reclaimed. "Tell me more," he urged gently, not demanding, just opening the door. "If we're riding into this, I need the lay of the land." She hesitated, the words sticking like dust in her throat, but the steadiness in his gaze pulled them free. Willow Creek had been a sprawl of clapboard buildings and chain-link fences, a place where laughter was rare and fear wore familiar faces. Harlan, with his wire-rimmed glasses and booming sermons on gratitude, had ruled it all, turning a blind eye to the vestiges of unrest that marked too many nights, claiming it was God's testing. The fire years back had gutted the main house, leaving signs of desperate struggle in the ashes, but no real answers. Olivia had been 16, scavenging the ruins for anything of her own, when she'd found the locket half buried in the rubble. Harlan had caught her, his grip iron on her wrist, demanding she hand it over as property of the home. She'd slipped it into her pocket that night, fleeing at dawn with nothing but a backpack and the weight of survival. Now, his call hinted at more. Whispers of records he'd twisted, favors called in from old allies in the system, a net closing to drag her back. Ethan listened without interruption, his jaw set like forged steel, the silver streaks in his hair catching the slanted light. When she finished, the silence stretched, broken only by the tick of the compass clock. "Sounds like corruption's got deep roots there," he said at last, standing to pace the room. "But roots can be pulled. The crew knows how to navigate that. Quiet entries, no guns blazing. We find proof, expose the rot without feeding it." Olivia rose too, her hand brushing his arm as she passed to the window, peering out at the lengthening shadows. The first scout bike crested the distant rise, a lone rider kicking up dust like a signal flare. Her heart quickened, not with fear but a flicker of something fierce, like pages turning to a new chapter. "And if it goes wrong? You're risking everything for a stranger's story." He turned to her, close enough now that she could smell the faint leather and pine on him, his presence an anchor in the gathering storm. "Not a stranger anymore, Olivia. Last night in that diner you stood your ground. That's the kind of honor that calls to men like us. And this locket, it's your promise to the past. We'll make sure it holds." The words landed soft but unyielding, weaving into the air between them. Outside, the scout pulled up, engine cutting to a purr as a weathered man in leathers dismounted. Samuel, his face lined like cracked earth, eyes sharp with loyalty. He nodded to Ethan through the screen door, a silent affirmation. As the afternoon bled into amber, more engines growled in the distance, the iron promise converging like tributaries to a river. Olivia watched from the porch, the locket now around her neck, cool against her skin. Ethan joined her, shoulder to shoulder, the wind rising with the promise of night. Dilemmas swirled in her mind. Trust this man and his brotherhood, or run alone into the fading light. But as the first bikes formed a loose line on the horizon, chrome glinting like drawn swords, she felt the shift. Not just survival, but redemption, etched in the roar of engines and the quiet strength of oaths renewed. The ride to Willow Creek loomed, a path of moral fire where truths would burn away the lies, binding them in ways neither could foresee. Twilight crept in, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold as the crew assembled, 10 strong now, faces etched with the miles they'd put behind them. Ethan briefed them in low tones by the bikes, the air humming with anticipation, the scent of hot metal mingling with cooling earth. Olivia stood at the edge, no longer the lone reader in a booth, but part of the story unfolding. The locket swung gently as she mounted behind Ethan on his bike, arms wrapping around his waist, the vibration thrumming through her like a heartbeat. Engines ignited in unison, a symphony of resolve, and they rolled out into the dusk, headlights piercing the gathering dark. Promises old and new fueled the journey toward a reckoning that would test loyalties and forge an unbreakable chain. The engines thrummed like a living pulse as the convoy cut through the deepening twilight, a line of shadows stretching across the cracked ribbon of highway that wound toward Willow Creek. Dust devils swirled in their wake, kicked up by tires that devoured the miles with relentless hunger. Olivia clung to Ethan's waist, the leather of his jacket warm against her cheek, the vibration of the bike seeping into her bones like a rhythm she was only beginning to understand. The wind whipped past, carrying the sharp bite of cooling sage and the faint, acrid whiff of exhaust, while stars began to prick the velvet sky overhead. Ahead, the taillights of the lead bikes glowed like embers. Noah at the front, his silhouette a dark sentinel guiding them into the unknown. Ethan rode steady, his hands firm on the grips, the road unfolding before them in a hypnotic blur of faded lines and distant mesas. He hadn't spoken much since they left the cabin, but his presence was a conversation in itself, solid, unyielding, a promise etched in motion. Olivia's mind raced with the landscape, fragments of the past surfacing like ghosts in the rear view. Willow Creek wasn't just a dot on a map. It was a scar, a cluster of weathered buildings huddled in a valley where the hills folded in on themselves, trapping secrets like smoke. Holland's voice echoed in her ears, that oily demand slithering back. Debts don't vanish. But now, with the iron promise flanking them, 10 riders strong, their leathers creaking in unison, she felt the tide shifting, a quiet force gathering against the corruption that had festered too long. They stopped once at a roadside pullout where the highway kissed the edge of a sheer drop, the valley below swallowed by night. Engines idled low, casting flickering shadows from headlights that sliced the dark. Samuel dismounted first, his boots crunching on gravel as he pulled a battered map from his saddlebag, the paper crinkling under calloused fingers. "Creek's about 40 miles north," he said, voice rough as the terrain, tracing a route with a scarred knuckle. "Back way in. Old logging trail avoids the main drag. Harlan's got eyes there, locals who owe him favors. We go quiet, scout first." The crew nodded, faces illuminated in the glow. Daniel's sharp features set in determination, his eyes reflecting the stars. Noah leaning on his bike, arms crossed, the salt of the coast still clinging to his jacket like a badge. Olivia slid off the bike, her legs unsteady from the ride, the locket a cool weight against her collarbone. She stepped to the edge, peering into the abyss where the wind moaned softly, carrying the faint scent of pine from the distant ridges. Ethan joined her, his shoulder brushing hers, a subtle anchor. "Second thoughts?" he asked, low enough for only her to hear, the words blending with the night's hush. She shook her head, auburn strands escaping her ponytail to dance in the breeze. "No, just remembering. The fire that night, it wasn't an accident. Whispers said Harlan pushed for insurance, covered up the unrest that led to it. Kids like me, caught in the crossfire of his kingdom. Taking the locket was my way of saying no, but it feels small now. against all this. He turned to her, the moonlight carving lines across his face, highlighting the silver in his hair and the scar along his jaw. Small acts start the fire, Olivia. That's what Lucas taught me. Stories begin with one page turned. This crew, we're the chapters that follow. His hand rested lightly on her arm, a touch that spoke of shared burdens, not possession. In that moment, amid the idling engines and the crew's murmured plans, she saw him not as the lone biker from the diner, but as the keeper of oaths, his library back home, a testament to battles won through words and will. The bond between them deepened, unspoken yet palpable, like the pull of the road drawing them forward. They pressed on, the convoy weaving through narrower paths where the asphalt gave way to dirt, jolting over ruts that tested their resolve. The air grew cooler, laced with the earthy dampness of the valley floor, as Willow Creek emerged from the gloom, a scatter of dim lights huddled against the hills, like wary eyes watching their approach. Harlan's domain. The Foster outpost with its sagging porches and chain-link barriers, now a fortress of faded paint and buried lies. They parked the bikes in a concealed grove off the trail, engines cutting to silence that rang in Olivia's ears. The crew fanned out, shadows melting into the underbrush, while Ethan and Olivia crept closer on foot, the crunch of leaves underfoot muffled by the night's blanket. From the tree line, they watched. The main house loomed, its windows glowing yellow against the black, figures moving inside like puppets in Harlan's play. A pickup truck sat out front, its bed loaded with crates that hinted at more than honest work, smuggled goods, perhaps, or tools for control. Olivia's breath caught as a door swung open, Harlan himself stepping onto the porch, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting under the bulb light. He was older now, paunchier, but the authority clung to him like mold, barking orders to two burly shadows who nodded with the deference of indebted men. "Find her trail!" he snarled, voice carrying on the wind. "That trinket's just the start. Girl owes me for the roof I gave her." The words twisted in Olivia's gut, igniting the moral fire Ethan had spoken of. Justice not through fists, but truth unearthed, loyalty standing against the rot. Ethan's hand found hers in the dark, a steady grip that grounded her racing heart. "We wait for the signal," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Noah's circling the back, Daniel's on the records shed. No rush to storm. We peel back the layers." But as they held position, a dilemma gnawed at her. Expose Harlan and risk dragging innocence into the light, or let the past bury itself deeper. The crew's distant signals flashed, two quick blinks from a hidden light, indicating eyes on the perimeter, tension coiled, ethical threads pulling tight as the first raindrops pattered through the leaves. A soft drumbeat heralding the confrontation ahead. The night deepened, the valley holding its breath, while inside the house Harlan paced, oblivious to the convergence of promises closing in. Olivia squeezed Ethan's hand, resolve hardening like steel in the forge. Redemption wasn't a solitary ride. It was this, family chosen in the shadows, oaths fulfilled under starlit skies. The rain picked up, veiling their advance, as the iron promise moved as one, toward a reckoning woven from quiet courage and unbreakable bonds. If this tale of hidden truths and steadfast loyalty is stirring something in you, drop a like below. It helps these stories reach more roads. Rain slicked the leaves and turned the earth to mud under their boots, a soft patter that masked the crew's approach like a conspirator's whisper. Olivia's heart hammered in sync with the downpour, each step through the underbrush pulling her deeper into the valley's embrace. The air was thick with the scent of wet pine and loamy soil, the kind that clung to your skin and soul, reminding you that some truths only surfaced in the storm. Ethan's grip on her hand was firm, but not crushing, a lifeline forged in the diner's dim light, now tested against the shadows of Willow Creek. Behind them, the iron promise moved like ghosts, Noah's broad frame leading the flank, Daniel slipping ahead to the record shed with the stealth of a man who'd outrun worse than rain. They crouched at the edge of the tree line. The main house just yards away, its porch light a hazy beacon through the veil of water. Harlan's voice boomed again from inside, distorted by the walls but sharp enough to cut. "Double the watch. Girl's slippery, but she can't run forever." Olivia's fingers tightened around the locket, the silver warmed by her palm, her mother's photo, a silent witness to the lies that had built this place. The Foster outpost sprawled like a forgotten dream, clapboard buildings sagging under years of neglect, chain-link fences rattling in the wind, all under Harlan's iron rule. He'd twisted protection into possession, oaths of care into chains that bound the vulnerable. But tonight, those chains would face the unyielding pull of another promise. Ethan signaled to Samuel, a subtle nod that rippled through the crew like a shared breath. Samuel melted into the shadows toward the truck, his objective the crates that hinted at Harlan's underbelly, perhaps ledgers of favors traded or relics from the fire that masked deeper unrest. Olivia watched, breath shallow, as Daniel reached the shed, a low structure with a rusted padlock that yielded to his tools with a faint click lost in the rain. The ethical weight pressed on her. This wasn't vengeance, but justice, exposing the rot without becoming it. Yet doubt flickered. What if the records implicated innocents, staff who'd turned blind eyes out of fear? Her own escape had left scars, questions unanswered, and now the crew's loyalty dragged them into her storm. A twig snapped nearby, sharp as a warning, and Ethan pulled her low. From the house a figure emerged, a guard, lantern in hand, sweeping the perimeter with lazy sweeps. Noah intercepted him silently, a hand over the mouth and a murmured word that dropped the man to his knees, bound and gagged with cord from a saddlebag. No harm. Just restraint, the iron promises code, born from wars where violence bred only more ghosts. Ethan whispered to Olivia, his voice a low rumble against the rain. "Stay close. We get in, get proof, get out. Harlan's kingdom crumbles on facts, not fury." She nodded, the locket's chain a cool thread against her neck, fueling her resolve. This was her story reclaiming its pages, with Ethan as the unexpected ally who'd turned a lone ride into a brotherhood stand. They slipped toward the house's side entrance, the door ajar like an unwitting invitation, rain dripping from the eaves in steady plinks. Inside, the air shifted to stale warmth, laced with the must of old paper and cigar smoke. Harlan's domain, a cluttered office off the main hall, where files towered like accusations. Voices echoed from the front room, Harlan barking at another lackey, his tone laced with the arrogance of unchecked power. Olivia's pulse thrummed as Ethan eased the door open, the hinges mercifully silent. They moved like shadows, her hand trailing the wall for balance, fingers brushing faded wallpaper that peeled like shedding lies. In the office, a desk lamp cast a yellow pool over scattered documents. Bills of sale, insurance claims from the fire, notes scrawled in Harlan's precise hand. Olivia's eyes scanned frantically. There, a folder marked estate remnants, the locket listed as salvaged property, tied to inflated claims that screamed fraud. The fire's signs of desperate struggle were buried in euphemisms, overlooked unrest, pinned on runaways like her to cover Harlan's greed. Ethan's breath was steady beside her, his presence a shield as he snapped photos with a small camera from his pocket, flashes muted by the storm outside. "This ties it," he murmured, pocketing a key document, a ledger showing kickbacks from the system. Harlan's web of corruption spun from positions of trust, but footsteps thudded closer, heavy and purposeful, and Olivia froze as the door swung wide. Harlan filled the frame, his wire-rimmed glasses fogged from the humidity, eyes narrowing behind them like a predator scenting blood. "You!" he snarled, recognition dawning on Olivia's face in the lamplight. "Thought you'd crawl back on your own. But bringing strays, This ends now. His hand dipped toward a drawer, but Ethan was faster, stepping forward with arms raised. Not in threat, but barrier. "No need for that," Ethan said, voice calm as desert dawn, edged with the weight of his own oaths. "We're here for the truth, Harlan. The records, the fire, the debts you invented. Let it go, and we walk with what proves it." Harlan's laugh was bitter, echoing off the walls, but uncertainty flickered in his stance, the isolation of a man whose kingdom was cracking. Olivia stepped beside Ethan, locket in hand, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "This isn't yours. It never was. You built your power on broken promises, to kids like me, to the system you twisted. But promises like that, they echo louder than your lies." The rain hammered the roof like applause, the crew's distant signals flashing through the window, Noah confirming the perimeter secure, Samuel with evidence from the truck, crates of falsified goods, proof of Harlan's side hustles. Tension coiled, ethical lines blurring in the dim light. Harlan's face twisted, a dilemma of his own, double down on control, or face the unraveling. He lunged for the phone, but Daniel burst in from the hall, crew at his back, their presence a wall of quiet resolve. No blows landed. Instead, words cut deeper. Ethan reciting the ledger's sins, Olivia holding the locket like a talisman, the iron promise bearing witness. Harlan sagged against the desk, the fight draining like the storm outside, whispers of surrender forming as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Anonymous tips already sent, justice rolling in on official wheels. As the crew escorted him out, rain-soaked and bound by cord and consequence, Olivia turned to Ethan in the emptying office, the documents clutched like reclaimed chapters. "You kept your promise," she said softly, the weight lifting as dawn's first grey light filtered through the grimy window. He smiled, faint lines crinkling his eyes, the scar on his jaw a badge of battles shared. "We all did. Yours, mine, the crew's. That's the story that endures." Outside, engines idled once more, the convoy ready to fade into the morning mist. Bonds forged stronger than steel. Redemption not in destruction, but in truths laid bare under the relentless sky. Yet as they rode away, a lingering shadow hinted at threads still loose, pulling toward one final twist in the road ahead. The first rays of dawn pierced the veil of rain, turning the valley into a watercolor of greys and golds, where puddles mirrored the sky like shattered promises pieced back together. The convoy rolled out from Willow Creek slow and deliberate, engines purring low to avoid drawing eyes from the awakening hills. Mud clung to the tires in thick clumps, flinging arcs of brown as the bikes navigated the logging trail back to the highway, the air fresh with petrichor and the faint metallic tang of justice served. Olivia rode pillion behind Ethan, her arms secure around his waist. The locket now a talisman of triumph rather than torment, its chain nestled against the warmth of his back. The documents, photocopies tucked safely in a saddlebag, were en route to unseen allies, anonymous drops that would unravel Harlan's web without a single shot fired. Sirens had faded in the distance, not for them, but for the outpost now crawling with investigators. The rot exposed under the light of day. Ethan's posture was relaxed yet vigilant, the wind tousling the silver threads in his dark hair as the road widened. The crew flanked them in loose formation, Noah leading with his steady throttle, Daniel bringing up the rear like a watchful shadow, Samuel's bike humming beside them, his occasional glance a nod of shared victory. No words passed over the roar. This was the language of the road, bonds reforged in the quiet aftermath of confrontation. Olivia's mind replayed the office scene, the way Harlan's bluster had crumbled, his kingdom reduced to a sagging man in the downpour, led away not by force, but by the weight of his own deceptions. The fires buried truths, the overlooked struggles, the twisted oaths of care, all laid bare by ledgers and loyalty. It wasn't vengeance, it was redemption, a moral fire that burned clean, leaving space for healing. As the highway stretched endless before them, the sun climbed higher, baking the moisture from the asphalt and filling the air with the warm, resinous scent of sun-warmed sage. They pulled over at a scenic overlook, engines cutting to a collective sigh, the valley sprawling below like a map of battles won. Bikes leaned on kickstands, leather creaking as the riders dismounted, steam rising from exhaust pipes in lazy curls. Olivia stepped off, her boots sinking slightly into the gravel shoulder, the locket catching the light as she stretched, muscles aching from the night's tension. Ethan joined her at the railing, his blue eyes scanning the horizon where Willow Creek's lights had vanished like a bad dream. "It's done," he said simply, voice gravel rough from the wind, but laced with a peace she hadn't heard before. "Harlan's facing the mirror now. The system's got the proof. No more shadows for him to hide in." She turned to him, auburn hair drying in loose waves, green eyes reflecting the vastness below. The crew milled nearby, sharing water from canteens and quiet laughs, stories exchanged in low tones about close calls and old rides, the iron promise alive again, not as a gang, but as family chosen in the crucible of need. Noah clapped Samuel on the back, their laughter carrying like distant thunder, while Daniel checked his bike, ever the mechanic of the group. Olivia felt it then, the shift from solitary pages to a shared narrative, books and bikes intertwining like vines on a trellis. "You gave me more than a defense in that diner," she said, her hand finding his, fingers lacing with a natural ease. "You gave me a crew, a chance to rewrite the ending, that promise you carried for Lucas. It saved pieces of me too." Ethan's scar softened in the morning light, his thumb tracing a gentle circle on her skin. The touch was electric, not urgent, but profound, like the first turn of a long-awaited page. "Lucas would have liked you. Fierce reader, fiercer heart. Said stories aren't just words, they're the oaths we live by. Watched too many break in the war, but this one, we held it together." He glanced at the crew, their faces etched with the same quiet honor, veterans who'd traded foxholes for highways, finding purpose in standing for the overlooked. The air hummed with unspoken gratitude, the desert wind whispering through the railings, carrying the faint echo of rain-fresh earth. No grand speeches, just the solidity of presence, Dud inked in miles and scars. They lingered there as the sun crested fully, golden light flooding the overlook and gilding the chrome on their bikes. Olivia pulled the locket open one last time, her mother's smile no longer haunted but honored, a legacy reclaimed. "Books over men," she murmured with a soft laugh, echoing her diner defiance. "But maybe some men are like the best stories, worth the ride." Ethan's faint smile broke wide, a rare warmth cracking his weathered facade, and he drew her into a brief embrace, the scent of leather and pine enveloping her like a well-worn cover. The crew watched with knowing nods, mounting up as the moment passed, engines firing in sequence, a symphony of resolve turning homeward. The ride back to the cabin unfolded in companionable silence, the convoy thinning as riders peeled off toward their own paths. Noah to the coast, Daniel to the valleys, Samuel to the ridges, each carrying the renewed oath like a spark in their saddlebags. By midday, it was just Ethan and Olivia, the highway blurring into familiar turns, the desert yielding to the cabin's welcoming shadow. Dust settled as they parked, the door creaking open to the familiar must of bookshelves, sunlight slanting across spines that now felt like old friends. She traced a volume of Frost, poems of roads not taken, promises kept, and turned to him, the weight of the night lifting like morning fog. "This place, your library, it's more than stories. It's home. He nodded, hanging his jacket. The flannel, revealing the man beneath the rider. Ours now, if you'll have it. The iron promise rides on, but some chapters, they settle. They shared coffee on the porch as the afternoon waned, the valley breeze stirring the pages of an open book between them, words weaving into the quiet. Harlan's shadow had faded, justice a poetic echo in the system's gears. But the real victory was here, in the chosen family, the redeemed oaths, the honor that outlasted the storm. Olivia leaned against Ethan's shoulder, the locket glinting, as the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in hues of quiet triumph. Promises survived, not in grand gestures, but in the enduring rhythm of lives intertwined, a legacy of courage written in ink and endless road. If this journey of rediscovered oaths and unbreakable bonds has touched your path, thank you for riding along. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more tales from the horizon. Your support keeps these stories rolling.